It was a massive event. The opening of the grand new casino was something that you just couldn't miss. I stood in the long winding line in the mall and received my free ticket to entry. It counted as a free admission to any of the games, which excited me as I wouldn't put my own money in. The younger bouncer waved me through, and I looked up with reverence at the elegant interior. The floor was black carpet with little silver specks that intersected the walls, lined with great pillar arches. The ceiling stretched up 100 feet or more, and they were elaborately carved at the edges. There was a great bowl in the center of the ceiling, dipped in an elaborate navy blue painting, the whole place outlined in gold. Although it was dark inside, the casino had an undeniable glow. It was brimming with people, machines, light, and life, and I became instantly lost inside. I saw a small bar and got a milky, citrusy drink. I found some neglected machines to take my free play. I tried one, but couldn't get it to do anything. I began to wonder again, looking through some of the nearby back rooms that were filled with machines as well. It reminded me a little of an old arcade. These rooms were quiet and nearly devoid of life. I suddenly found a wide opening in the rooms, leading back to the main auditorium, but found it to be silent and empty as well. I walked around a little, looking at the elegant building and the gambling cabinets, though I couldn't see a single soul. I passed the main bar on the way out, where I grabbed another orange drink before leaving the Grand Casino. One day, my good friend Rot the Times and I were on vacation. We were staying at an old, creepy, and run-down hotel. There were no beaches around us or hiking spots or that much of a city. Past and present found a nice place to have a dinner date on, but they left us all in the hotel. I brewed a cup of coffee and sat down in a slightly uncomfortably moist armchair, where I prepared to spend the next several hours, simply contemplating about this and that. But Future and Rot were more antsy. When they found a box of matches, I decided that it would be more beneficial if I was to pull out my old car and take them for a ride. We drove around the small town, eventually finding an old abandoned church. This was very much my speed of excitement, and the two rushed to the basement to explore. I took some time on the ground level, but eventually I wanted to go upstairs. I found the staircase hidden away in a bit of an odd place, but I didn't want to go alone. I went downstairs to see that the two had already laid waste to one of the rooms. I asked them if they wanted to go to the highest level, but they didn't seem too interested. I told them that the stairwell was hidden, which meant that there might be something mysterious or wonderful up there, but they simply didn't share my passion for what was old and forgot. I looked around down there. It was a main room and a couple rooms to the side, but in one of those rooms, a particularly neglected room that I could tell that the church didn't use even when it was there was an odd purple curtain. I pushed it to the side and found a spiral staircase. My initial thought was that it went up to the second floor, a more mysterious entrance to a more mysterious floor. But as I looked up, I realized that it extended forever. I called the two over, and they were fascinated with it. Their initial thought was to race up as high as they could go, to throw stuff down and down. But we all got a strange feeling at the same time. Dread and despair. We were not supposed to see that staircase. Future gingerly closed the curtain and said, "Another time, another day." And we walked back outside. Out there, the laughter and the fun resumed as we drove back to the old hotel. As even Raj in future realized that some things aren't meant to be touched, I realized that some things are meant to stay forgotten. The church was having a big event and everyone was going. Me and the Times showed up just after the last rays of sun vanished from the sky, and we got a seat in an obscure room in the church. At some point, for some reason, I got up and went through the empty nursery section of the church when I noticed a door that stood out. There was nothing special about it. It was just a wood door in a dark hallway, but I felt drawn to it, so I took a chance and went in. Directly in front of me was a window into another room that I had to cup my hands around to see past the glare inside. It was a colorful room, made of those foam coloring squares. The room was huge, and I knew I couldn't see all of it. I continued left down a long hallway that was decorated like a nursery. At some point, I came to a section where the big pane window ended and I could enter the room. And I knew then I had found something special, a nursery that went on forever, hidden in my very own church. I went to East Town Mall's old theater one time. It had been remodeled recently and looked nothing like its mysterious past iteration. With the expansive underground arcade entrance being sealed, I explored the new theater a little. When I saw some old arcade games in a dark corner across from a new daycare that they had added. But between the arcade machines I saw it, an entrance to the arcade. I instantly slipped inside, being transported into a small, dimly lit room, cast in a yellowish-green light. The room had old arcade machines lining the walls, some of them still on, and there was a pool table in the center. There was a door opposite to me in the room that I went to, being greeted with a near-identical room on the other side, but this time with an island of arcade machines in the middle instead of the pool table. In there was another door flanking me, and as well as the next room, near identical rooms with little changes stretched out infinitum, gradually getting darker and smaller as I went, until I stepped into a dark room. Fluorescence buzzed aggressively overhead, and I was blocked from the other door by piled up old arcade machines. I decided that I had gone far enough, and I returned. The infinite arcade was still in there somewhere, buried and forgotten by near all except me. And I wouldn't forget, as I vowed that I would visit the infinite arcade again. I was on a church-sponsored mission trip when after a long day I decided that I wanted to take a shower. The facility we were staying in was old and laid out in a very weird way. I had trouble finding out where the shower actually was, so I decided a good place to start would be the bathroom. Now the boys all slept together and the girls with each other, and there were bathrooms connected to their rooms. So I got in mine and looked around a bit, and I saw a small entrance to another room. This one was near identical, but for some reason it connected to the girls' room. Though it was weird, I thought I might be onto something, and I looked in a similar spot for a door to a room behind that one. I kept going back and back. At some point I met Fade with a group of girls also looking for a shower. Eventually it was just us traveling together, but it came to an end when we found a smaller room with no clear way of progressing. She turned around and went back, and I was just about to do the same. But then something told me to look up. When I did, I saw a shower head above me and an entrance to something. When I got up there, I found a huge pool of water, an elegantly made mass bath. I got in, of course. I was ready for that shower. The warning signs were there, so I was vigilant and caught it when a slender, dark figure disappeared into the pool on the other side of the room. I found reason enough to get back out and hurry back to my room. Though through mistake or intention, I ended up in the girls' room where I shared with Fade what had happened. It turns out that she and the girls had randomly found a group of stalls with showers inside. When it was time for me to go, I stepped back into the connecting bathrooms, but this time they were pitch black. I walked slowly, things scuttered past me, brushing up against my legs. Too big to be a rat. I made it back to my room, of course. You may ask why I always find myself in these situations. Why I run maybe seem obvious, but there's more to it than it seems. I'm as durable as my name and shouldn't have to worry about what things go bump in the night. But you wouldn't check if a spider was venomous if it landed on your head. Me, however, if it got that close, I'd just swat it dead. One day I went to a small Asian restaurant. It was dark and old, and the outside looked fairly decrepit. On the inside, I was the only one there, but I was seated. They brought me to a far room in the back and sat me in there, closing the curtain behind them. I waited for a good while, only having the several mirrors on the walls to look at, but eventually I got bored. I stepped out of my room, pulling the curtain back to see identical rooms to the left and the main dining area to the right. I continued to walk further back, looking at all the different rooms. Inside, they all had mirrors lining the wall, like mine. Each room was lit by a single buzzing incandescent bulb, and as I went down, there was no changes in them. Although, I noticed that the lights began to turn off. First, it was just a couple down the hallway, but then it was more and more, and they appeared to be coming in my direction. I went back to my room, pulling my curtain behind me, and waited still. Yet no one ever came. I thought that service was usually better at the Infinite Asian Restaurant. While coming back from a trip with my church, they decided to make a stop at a big box store. Fade got out and explored the big empty store, largely by herself. It was an odd place, big and empty, but well-maintained. Along another dusty aisle, she noticed an oddity behind a nearly empty, neglected shelf. Fade stopped and looked closer, realizing that this shelf in particular was in front of the large door leading to darkness. Fade found enough space in between the aisle and the edge of the door to squeeze inside the room. Inside was the courtyard of a small but not tiny mall. There was a skylight in the mall that let in pale moonbeams above a dry fountain full of dirt. As the only other source of light in the room, Fade drew close to the ex-fountain and flower pots. "What grows here?" a cold and quiet voice asked from behind her. Fade turned around to ask what to the man who bore a slight resemblance to Dust, though she knew the difference. "What grows here?" the man in the dark asked again. But Fade, of course, didn't know the answer, so she let them all fall silent for a long and uncomfortable moment. It was so silent then that English falls short in describing it. It was as though every single decibel that could have been in the mall was being absorbed in the dark and lifeless corners of it. At once, Fade found her voice and admitted that she didn't know the answer to the riddle that probably never had one in the first place. Silence fell again, and Fade began to step away, and the figure also drew back before it jumped on her, attacking her, raising its hand before striking, when it then suddenly turned to dust. Fade, confused, looked around, only to see me at the entrance of an old mall store. I was on the trip too, and when we pulled over, I also noticed the entrance to the hidden mall. And now, with the weasel dark gone, we could explore the place together in peace. What grows there, I wonder? Don't ask me. I'm the guy who makes these things, but if you haven't heard this already, all these videos are based off of dreams I've had. And in the dream, it wasn't Fade wandering around the hidden mall. It was actually me, and it was actually Dust that posed the riddle without an answer, if you will. So if you think you have any explanations or any ideas about that, I'd love to hear about them in the comments below. Anyways, thank you all for watching. This was a real fun one to make. Real weird too, now watching it. God bless you all, and I'll see you later. Bye. I got another temporary job, this time at a grocery store. One day the manager told me to go to this old lady's house and collect some money that she owed to the store. So I went out into the strip mall where the store was located. As I walked along my side of the street, I noticed how many stores in the strip mall had recently closed. I looked over to the other side where an identical strip mall now only hosted long closed and abandoned shops, and I wondered if the same would be true for ours in the near future. The old lady lived in the strip mall and had an office in one of the storefronts. I opened the door and went inside, amazed at how immaculate it was. The ceiling was tall, there were arches everywhere, and elegance exuded from the place. I saw her in an elegant desk in the center of the room. The desk was piled high with papers, and the closer I got, the more weary she looked. She had a servant girl who was apparently expecting me as she announced my presence. She looked up at me, and the posh woman in her late 30s said she was busy and couldn't pay at the moment. So I left and went to one of the few open shops, a few empty stores down. Not looking for anything in particular, I found myself absently looking out the window. But when I came back to the store, it was all empty. The floor covered in a layer of dust and everything gone. I stepped out the same front door where I had came to see that the shop no longer existed. The place had been forgotten, much like many others. A common tragedy, but a tragedy nonetheless. One time I found a job that paid pretty well, but I would have to go to an official school to train for it. The company paid for it, but I still wasn't too excited about the idea. At least Rot was taking the class with me. But the professor-teacher type person never showed up to class. We all got quiet when the class was about to start. but started talking again when it was clear that the teacher wasn't going to show up. I was glad to have Rot there with me then to talk to, but something was giving me a foreboding feeling. This class was in a very small room that was basically just a broom closet, so I thought it might have just been the isolation of the place. When the class was over and we all went to the company-provided lunch, there were already people in there. The cafeteria was full, so the remaining cooks took us to a small conference room deep in the school. After a little over an hour with no word from anybody, I saw another class passing by through the pane glass window that connected our room to the hallway. I ran out into the hall and caught a girl in the back of the group. I had rushed out so quick I didn't think of a question to ask her, but I knew I wanted to see if she had any answers. It didn't matter though, as she spoke first, saying, "It's happening to us too," before walking off. I looked through the window between the hall and the room. Rot and a couple other people were looking at me, but I didn't know what to say. Even when I went back inside, I was just as blank as before. Sometimes when you go looking for answers, you only come back with more questions. And sometimes a job offer is too good to be true. But when there's a whole world out there, you can't always play it safe. One day, Fade and I went to a Kmart that was in the city that I had never heard of before. Usually I avoided the place, but I do like Kmart, and I suppose they're rare these days. Now, I had guessed that it wouldn't be just like every other Kmart, but before we were inside, I had no idea what it was going to look like. It was not like a normal Kmart. It had rooms that receded back into the dark building. It had clothes, electronics, sports stuff, toys, and furniture, like normal, but in their own separate rooms, with the latter being in the furthest back. It didn't make a loop or anything, so in the furthest back room, full of old furniture, we had to turn around to go back. I had to admit it was unique. I hadn't seen anything else quite like it. It was on the way back, though, that I noticed a door that definitely shouldn't have been there. It looked like a door out of a house, and I was immediately drawn to it. I opened it, and on the inside was a massive room with a huge ceiling stretching up. The floor was made of astroturf, and the walls were made of windows letting in golden sunlight. Fade and I took to the room right away, and even stayed there for a little bit, but eventually we did leave. The room was a feature Fade and I surely did enjoy, though I wondered how long Kmart's checkbook could keep it around. I was fishing out of the woods off a big cliff one day. It was pleasant and peaceful, but I kept hearing this weird sound. It sounded like a fake bird call, and it was happening all around me. At some points, I got a little spooked, and I started walking up the steep embankment behind me, when I saw a massive figure dart in between some trees ahead of me. At this point, I turned around and quickly jumped. I glided down to the water and flew right above the surface, pulling up when I saw some people. In the sky above, I saw that the people in the lake were having a party in a big pool above a waterfall. I descended in an arc, flying above the people towards the fall, touching down in the water before I reached it. The fall fed through a hole in the rock, which I crawled through and jumped I nosedived with the waterfall, but pulled up before I hit the water below. I flew onto the beach cave under the fall and landed on the soft, cool sand. There were people under there talking about shady secrets and old things, but there was something else. A run-down old arcade sat at the edge of the cliff where the vegetation was starting to grow. The place was dimly lit, but full of kids running this way and that. The old arcade machines made loud noises, and the place seemed quite lively despite its rundown nature. I exchanged $1 for quarters, but found more quarters in my pocket when I went to put the first 4 in, and I moved over to some arcade machines in the back of the room. A lot of the old arcade cabinets were broken, but I found a janky claw machine that works, and I played it once for 50 cents. I continued to look around when I saw Future standing by some bumper cars. I went over to him and greeted him politely and asked what the party was for. He said that it was one of his parents' friend's son's birthday, and that he had been invited. I gave him a handful of quarters because he looked sad, like he usually does, before moving on to the back of the arcade, where they had 2 big party rooms full of kids, and in front of that, freezers full of ridiculous amounts of ice cream. I saw the other 2 times getting out a large bag, and thought, who else would throw a party like this but them or their friends? Fade and I were on yet another church trip, only this one was a relaxing number where we would go to a cabin and stay for a few days. More about just being a vacation than anything that had to do with serving. We got there late in the night and unpacked, but got back out on the road again to go to a one-of-a-kind big box store that was located within the area. We parked in the back of the parking lot, despite it being desolate and empty, and all walked up to the door, where we met as a group before flooding through the aisles. They and I stayed together for a little bit, but got separated. The point of going there was to get food, so I got myself a sandwich before idly looking around. I found a technology section that I quite liked. All the things there were outdated, like old MP3 players, box TVs, and outdated laptops and such. But I found a Game Boy there that I could play through the package. I was closely looking at something else when Future walked by and said that they were leaving. I finished reading what I was before lightly jogging towards the door. The whole group was up there, so we only had to wait a few moments for a couple people to check out at the old yellowed registers before we all left together. Outside, the weather had deteriorated. There was heavy wind, and it was even raining by this point. I put my hands in the pocket of my coat and began walking quickly towards the bus while everybody else ran, and a few people waited at the awning. I was more surprised than anything when the wind caught my jacket and lifted me up several feet into the air. I was flying around uncontrollably in the harsh wind. All I really had to do was take my hands out of my pockets and I would have been fine. But in all the action, I forgot about that until Fade told me to from the ground. My hands were stuck, and by the whole thing, I was up at least 20 feet into the air. Fade did still my mind, though, and I began to think. I twisted in the air to let the wind carry me safely to the bus. I played around with it for a bit and got there fairly easily, where I held onto the mirror and watched the others struggle forward against the wind. Faye and I were in the car going to a nicer restaurant on yet another date when I noticed a twinkle in the sky. It wasn't where the sun was supposed to be, and when I heard the tornado sirens resume their rusty call, I recognized it as a massive asteroid on an impending collision course with Earth. I stopped the car at a long-abandoned diner's parking lot, and Fade and I both got out to stare up at the sky. I simply wanted to watch the spectacle, but Fade appeared to be in panic. I asked her what she was so concerned about, but she never gave me a straight answer. Of course, I had forgotten again just how fragile Fade was. So, I pointed up to the sky at the asteroid, not sure if it would work, but I managed to reduce the asteroid to the dust which it had been formed from. It blanketed the whole sky, covering everything. I struggled to remain upright as Fade regained her composure, and we both got in the car, only minutes later. We didn't go to the restaurant as we knew the humans would react in a strange way, and from a cabin that we commandeered way out in the woods, in a town that most people haven't heard of, we saw how they tried to explain the phenomena. But Fade knew that it was an act for her, and that was enough for me.